The neon sign above Harbor Lane Diner flickered against the bruised Georgia sky, casting jittery reflections across the rain-slick parking lot. Thunder growled low in the distance, vibrating through the cracked asphalt as the heavy scent of wet concrete and fried bacon bled into the night air. Inside, the hum of conversation was brittle, stretched thin over the clatter of dishes and the sharp bark of orders from the kitchen. Through the glass door, a man stepped in, hoodie damp from the drizzle, worn boots tracking small puddles across the tile. His presence barely caused a ripple. No one recognized him as Cameron Westbrook, founder and CEO of the very chain whose name was printed above the door. At 43, Cameron carried more than the weight of a growing empire. He carried the guilt of wondering if somewhere along the climb he had lost sight of what mattered. Lately, the smiling reports from his managers didn't match the whispers he'd been hearing, the rumors of overworked staff, disrespect, and a slow rot beneath the surface. Tonight he wasn't here for a press event or a ribbon cutting. Tonight he came to see for himself. And in less than an hour, when the muffled sound of a waitress crying would echo from the kitchen, he would realize the dream he built was crumbling right in front of him. The night air clung heavy and wet as Cameron Westbrook killed the headlights and rolled his battered Ford Explorer into a cracked corner of the Harbor Lane Diner parking lot. A flickering neon sign buzzed overhead, its light barely cutting through the mist, curling off the asphalt. He sat there for a beat, heart drumming in his ears, the dashboard clock ticking louder than it should. This was it. No security detail, no tailored suits, no hint of the CEO he was. Tonight, he was just another tired face in a sea of forgettable ones. Pulling up the hood of his faded sweatshirt, Cameron checked his reflection in the rearview mirror. The thick-rimmed glasses and salt and pepper beard blurred the sharp authority lines of his face, softening him into someone easy to overlook. He exhaled slowly, shoved open the door, and stepped out into the drizzle. Inside, the diner buzzed with the low-grade chaos of a Friday night rush. The scent of burnt coffee, fryer oil, and desperation hung heavy. Vinyl booths cracked at the seams, fluorescent lights buzzed unevenly. Cameron pushed through the entrance, head down, posture slouched, doing everything he could to fold into the scenery. No one spared him a second glance, not the hostess absorbed in her phone, not the tired father wrestling a screaming toddler, not the manager barking orders from behind the counter. Perfect. He slid into a booth by the window, the cracked leather squeaking under his weight. From here, he could see it all. The strained smiles, the impatient glares, the exhaustion simmering just below the surface. He hadn't even ordered a coffee yet, and already a knot was tightening in his gut. Something was wrong here, and he was about to find out just how wrong. The waitress appeared a moment later, a notepad clutched tight in one hand, a forced smile stretched thin across her face. Her name tag read Tasha. Up close, Cameron caught the tired tremble in her voice as she greeted him, the way her eyes darted nervously toward the kitchen every few seconds, as if waiting for something to go wrong. "Coffee?" she offered, pen already poised. "Please," Cameron said, voice low, casual. She scribbled, nodded, and hurried away, weaving through a battlefield of clinking plates, impatient sighs, and undercurrents of tension thick enough to choke on. Cameron watched her move, too fast, too stiff, like someone perpetually bracing for impact. From the kitchen, a harsh male voice cracked the air. "Tasha, table 3's still waiting. Move it." Heads turned, conversations dipped. Tasha flinched mid-step, nearly spilling a tray of glasses. Cameron's jaw tightened. He recognized that bark. It wasn't the shout of leadership, it was the bark of fear, designed to humiliate, to dominate. Sliding lower into the booth, he sipped the bitter coffee she brought. Across the diner, an elderly couple murmured about the slow service. Two teenagers at the counter snickered after receiving a cold stare from the short, stocky manager. Donnie Hartman, no name tag, just authority worn like armor. The room felt brittle, as if one wrong word might snap the fragile balance holding it all together. A young cook hustled past, sweat beading on his forehead, sleeves rolled up to his elbows. His sneakers squeaked against the greasy tile. No one smiled, no one laughed. Cameron tapped his fingers against the chipped table edge, pulse picking up. The reports hadn't been exaggerations. Beneath the surface of Harbour Lane, the rot was already deep. The clang of a dropped tray snapped through the diner like a gunshot. Cameron's gaze jerked to the kitchen door just in time to see Tasha disappear behind it, head bowed, shoulders tight. Seconds later, muffled voices bled through the thin swinging doors. Angry. Sharp. He leaned forward, coffee forgotten, heart thrumming with a pulse he hadn't felt since the early days of building Harbour Lane with his own blistered hands. "I'm doing the best I can," Tasha's voice cracked through the wall, raw, desperate. A man's growl followed, unmistakably Donnie's. "Best isn't good enough if customers are walking out. You screw this up, you're gone. Understand?" There was a beat of silence, then the soft, broken sound of sobbing. Cameron stood so abruptly, his chair scraped against the floor, drawing a few curious glances. He ignored them, crossing the diner in quick, heavy strides. The smell of grease and sour coffee thickened as he neared the kitchen. He pushed the door open with one hand, stepping into the hot, claustrophobic chaos beyond. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Pots clattered. The air hung thick with steam and tension. Tasha stood by the prep table, hands trembling, wiping her face with the sleeve of her uniform. Donnie loomed over her, arms crossed, his face twisted into a sneer of contempt. Two young cooks at the fryer station kept their heads down, pretending not to hear, not to see. Cameron's chest tightened. This wasn't a bad day. This was a culture rotted from the inside. He cleared his throat, voice low but cutting through the noise. "Is there a problem here?" The kitchen froze. Donnie turned slowly, a flash of annoyance crossing his face. The air charged, brittle as glass, ready to shatter. Donnie squared his shoulders, masking surprise with a cocky smirk. "No problem," he said, voice dripping false charm. "Just a little correction. Happens when people don't keep up." Tasha wiped her sleeve across her face, blinking fast, trying to pull herself together. But the defeat in her posture was unmistakable. Cameron kept his voice even, but let the weight of it settle across the room. "She looks like she could use a break." Donnie scoffed, waving a greasy hand toward the dining room. "Rush hour, no time for hand-holding. They know what they signed up for." Across the kitchen, one of the young cooks, skinny, nervous, barely 20, shifted from foot to foot, casting a glance at Tasha. His name tag read Luis. He opened his mouth, hesitated, then forced the words out. "She's been running non-stop since 10 this morning. No break. No water." The kitchen stilled. Even the sizzling fryer seemed to hold its breath. Donnie's eyes narrowed. "Luis, stay in your lane before you find yourself looking for another job." Cameron stepped forward, closing the distance until only inches separated him from Donnie. "And who's supposed to make sure they don't burn out or pass out on the floor?" he asked quietly, voice like a blade wrapped in silk. For the first time, Donnie faltered. His mouth opened, but no words came out. Cameron looked past him, at Tasha, still shaking, at Luis standing there like a soldier ready to be shot for speaking the truth. Every instinct told Cameron the same thing. This wasn't about one bad day. This was a pattern, a sickness that started at the top and bled into every corner. He needed more, but he already knew. The real storm was just beginning. The kitchen door swung back and forth behind Cameron as he stepped into the dining room, anger simmering just beneath the surface. Tasha trailed behind him, her head bowed, her hands twisting the hem of her apron. Donnie stormed out after them, voice raised enough to grab every customer's attention. "You don't run this place, buddy," he snapped. "Sit down, eat your food, and mind your business." Heads turned, forks paused mid-air. A toddler dropped his crayon, forgotten. Cameron pivoted slowly, fixing Donnie with a look that sliced the air between them. For a beat, the entire diner held its breath. "You're right about one thing," Cameron said, voice low, lethal. "I don't just run this place." He reached into the worn pocket of his hoodie, pulling out a black leather wallet. With a flick of his wrist, he opened it, revealing a gleaming company ID with his photo, his name, and one unmistakable title stamped in bold letters: Founder and CEO, Harbour Lane Diners. A gasp rippled through the room. Donnie's face drained of color. Tasha froze, eyes wide, coffee pot trembling slightly in her hands. Luis peeked from the kitchen, stunned, silent. Cameron let the weight of the moment settle, then took a step forward. "You work for me, Donnie. You work for them," he said, sweeping a hand toward Tasha, Luis, and the shell-shocked staff. "And you just showed me exactly why this place is rotting from the inside out." Donnie stammered, his bravado crumbling like a wall hit by a wrecking ball. I was just trying to—" "No," Cameron cut in sharply. "You were trying to break them, to squeeze everything out of people and call it leadership." His voice dropped even lower, deadly calm. "That ends now." The diner sat frozen, hanging on every word. Donnie stood rigid, fists clenching at his sides, but he said nothing. Because deep down, he knew. He'd just been caught in the act. For a long moment, the diner was silent except for the faint buzz of the overhead lights. Rain tapped against the windows like a slow, insistent drumbeat. Cameron kept his gaze locked on Donnie, unflinching. He saw the flicker of panic there, the desperate calculation of a man realizing he had run out of excuses. "I gave my life to this place," Donnie finally exploded, voice cracking under the pressure. "I worked doubles, covered for people, took pay cuts when no one else would." Cameron didn't blink. "And somewhere along the way," he said quietly, "you started thinking that gave you the right to mistreat the people who trusted you." Donnie's chest heaved, his hands balled into fists, not in defiance, but in helplessness. Years of resentment, exhaustion, and unspoken fear clung to him like sweat. Cameron felt a bitter pang of recognition. He knew that road. He had walked it once, scraping through 3 jobs, sleeping in his car, while Harbor Lane was just a dream scribbled on napkins. But he had vowed never to become the kind of man who forgot the price of dignity. "You think it's pressure that gives you permission to break people?" Cameron's voice softened, dangerous in its calm. "You think survival justifies cruelty?" Donnie didn't answer. He couldn't. Cameron exhaled slowly, the weight of the moment pressing down like a storm ready to break. "You're done here," he said, final and cold, effective immediately. The words hit like a hammer. Donnie staggered back a step, swallowing hard, but didn't argue. Some part of him knew it was over. Without another word, Donnie grabbed his stained apron, tossed it onto the nearest table, and pushed out into the rain. The door slammed shut behind him with a hollow finality. Inside, the silence cracked. Tasha's shoulders sagged. Luis let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Across the room, a few customers exchanged glances, some nodding slightly, almost in silent approval. Cameron turned back toward the staff, his jaw tight but his heart steadier. This was only the beginning. The rain had eased into a soft drizzle by the time Cameron gathered the staff around the front counter. The sharp tension that had once strangled the air had begun to loosen, replaced by something raw but alive. Hope, thin and tentative, like the first green shoot after a storm. Tasha stood off to the side, arms wrapped protectively around herself. Luis hovered nearby, shifting awkwardly from foot to foot. A few other employees peeked from the kitchen, unsure whether they were about to get scolded or saved. Cameron rested his palms flat on the counter, grounding himself before he spoke. "I owe you an apology," he began, voice steady but thick with emotion, "for being gone too long, for trusting paper reports instead of the people who make this place real." A murmur ran through the group, surprise, maybe disbelief. Cameron pressed on. "Starting today, that changes." He turned toward Luis. "You stepped up when it mattered. That's leadership. I'm promoting you to interim assistant manager, effective immediately. We'll get you proper training and a raise to match." Luis blinked, stunned, a slow, stunned grin pulling at his mouth. Then Cameron turned to Tasha. "And you," he said, his voice softening, "you kept showing up when it would have been easier to quit. You cared when others stopped." Tasha's eyes shimmered, and she quickly looked away, biting her lip. "I'm giving you a raise, and we're changing scheduling policies starting next week. No more 8-hour shifts without a break. No more choosing between your health and your job." Around them, the diner seemed to breathe again. A quiet buzz of whispered relief moved like a ripple across the floor. "We're also bringing in a new manager, someone who knows that respect isn't optional." Cameron straightened, scanning their faces, tired but hopeful, guarded but willing. He knew trust wouldn't rebuild overnight, but it was a start, And for the first time in a long time, Harbour Lane Diner felt alive again. 2 weeks later, Cameron stood outside the Harbour Lane Diner just as the sun dipped below the Georgia skyline, setting the windows ablaze in a wash of gold. The neon sign above the entrance, once flickering and half dead, now burned steady and proud. Inside, laughter floated through the open door, plates clattered, not with tension, but with rhythm. The air was different, lighter, warmer. It wasn't perfect yet, but it was alive. Tasha caught sight of him from the register and waved, a real smile lighting her face. Luis was joking with a new hire by the Friars. Even the regulars at the counter looked up with nods of recognition and something rarer: respect. Cameron took a slow breath, feeling the weight he hadn't realized he was carrying finally lift from his chest. He thought back to the early days, when Harbour Lane was just a scrappy dream stitched together with faith and stubbornness. He hadn't built it for quarterly reports or expansion targets. He had built it for nights like this, for places where people mattered, where dignity wasn't a privilege but a given. Somewhere along the climb, he had forgotten. Tonight, he remembered. He stepped inside, feeling the hum of life around him, and leaned against the counter as Tasha approached. "Feels different, huh?" she said, wiping her hands on her apron, her voice lighter than he'd ever heard it. Cameron smiled, small and real. "It's supposed to." They stood there for a moment, just taking it in, and Cameron realized something deeper. A business isn't made of walls, menus, or logos. It's made of people, hearts stitched together by work, by hope, by the simple, stubborn belief that respect must live in every small daily act. You can build empires, you can chase numbers, but if you lose sight of the people who lift the dream higher every day, you lose everything that ever made it worth building. Cameron wouldn't forget again, not ever. In the quiet after the storm, Cameron understood something that textbooks and boardrooms never taught. Leadership wasn't about commanding from the top, it was about protecting the roots. It was about walking into the cracks before they became chasms. It was about listening before the damage was too deep to undo. He had built Harbour Lane diners from grit and sweat, but somewhere along the way, he had mistaken growth for success, numbers for health. Now he saw the truth. A company's true health lives in the spaces you don't always see. In the tired eyes of a waitress still smiling after a double shift, in the unspoken courage of a young cook standing up when it would be easier to stay silent. It's easy to celebrate wins on spreadsheets. It's harder and infinitely more important to celebrate the people who make those wins possible. Respect isn't a luxury to be handed out when convenient. It's the oxygen every great business breathes or suffocates without. And dignity isn't earned by productivity quotas. It's earned the moment a person shows up, rain or shine, fear or fatigue, and gives you their time, their energy, their care. You can't buy that loyalty, you can only honor it. Cameron realized that real power wasn't sitting in the corner office or printed under a CEO title. Real power was in the daily invisible decisions, to see people, to hear them, to care. It was easy to forget when you stood too far above. It was dangerous to forget when the stakes were not just profits, but hearts. As Cameron walked away from the diner that night, he didn't just carry plans for better policies or new training programs. He carried a renewed vow. Never again would the dream grow bigger than the people who built it. Because in the end, the true measure of a leader isn't how high they climb. It's how many others they lift along the way. As Cameron Westbrook pulled away from the Harbour Lane diner that night, the rain had finally stopped. The streets shimmered under the streetlights, a mirror reflecting the world as it could be, if someone was willing to stop, to listen, to act. He hadn't just exposed a problem, he had started a transformation. One not built with press releases or policy memos, but with the courage to confront hard truths and the humility to put people first again. In a world that often measures success by numbers and overlooks the souls who drive it, Cameron chose a different path. He chose to rebuild from the inside out. Not because it was easy, but because it was right. Some leaders build empires, the rare ones build legacies. And as the neon sign of Harbour Lane diners burned steady in his rearview mirror, Cameron knew this wasn't the end of his journey. It was just the beginning of leading the way he was always meant to. with integrity, with heart, and with a respect that could never be faked. Because true leadership isn't about how loudly you speak. It's about how deeply you listen. And sometimes, the quietest moments create the loudest echoes.